Thanks, Laura, for the introduction. Thanks to MSHP for the invitation to speak again here. How many were here last time I spoke at this? Okay, I'm glad I changed my slides. I've given a couple presentations like this about first career steps or how to be a resident and get into a real job and how to approach that. And, there's really no objective data that I'm going to talk about or real facts. This is kind of an opinion, and there's other people in the room that have been in practice for a while, and I'm sure they have either similar or completely different opinions on these topics. And I think that's really kind of one of my key messages to walk away from this is there's a lot of resources within the profession, at your institution, people that you network with at a place like MSHP or within a group like MSHP that can help you in taking those first career steps and even taking some of those middle and later career steps, because there's really resources all around us. And we'll try and talk about some of that. So by the end of the presentation, I hope that you'll be able to describe how to develop your practice as a new practitioner, to discuss the importance of networking and organizational involvement in your career, and to explain ways to reinvent your career as you go along. So we're going to start with developing a new practice. So how many have a plan? Not the seasoned people in the audience, but among the residents, how many have a plan for what you're going to do in your career? By show of hands. Okay. Well, failure to plan is planning to fail. This is one recycled slide from a past presentation. I kind of like that quote. I'm sure you really have a plan and you just didn't want to raise your hand. But let's get you engaged some more, and you really have to raise your hand. I'm happy standing up here for 50 minutes and waiting for you to respond. But we'll kind of move through this more quickly as you respond. So, don't you want to be a clinical generalist in a hospital? You got a couple hands. Clinical specialist? A few more hands. Clinical coordinator? 1, 2. Manager? You can't. Anybody manager? Maybe 1. Director of pharmacy? Chief pharmacy officer? COO? Entrepreneur? Anything else? Anything that I didn't have listed here? Okay. So the purpose of this is really, if we kind of capped out here at manager. We stopped having anybody even remotely thinking beyond that, and really the numbers beyond clinical specialists were pretty small. And I think in general, and this isn't necessarily a pharmacy thing, it's just a how people think thing, is that we typically think smaller rather than bigger. And I'd encourage you to think bigger, or think past that first job. And I think the reason most people raise their hand in the first couple categories here is because you are finishing a residency. That's a big undertaking to complete a residency, and you just want to get to the next thing. But I'd encourage you to really think of what's beyond that, or where you really want to get to, because you don't want to necessarily walk into that first position and that's where you're at for 30 years. Most people move on to different things. So what is thinking bigger then? I need a job. To think bigger, you're saying I need a career. I want to be a clinical specialist as my job. Well, maybe thinking bigger is I want to be director of pharmacy someday. I want to be a pharmacy faculty member. Well, how about the dean of the College of Pharmacy? I want to volunteer with MSHP. Well, maybe thinking bigger is MSHP president. And maybe if you're saying today, I want to be director of pharmacy, which we don't have anybody saying at this point. But maybe thinking bigger is, I want to be hospital CEO. The point is, most of us think we're thinking big, but we're really thinking small. And we can always do a better job of really kind of projecting into where we want to go in the future. So one of my objectives here is to talk about establishing yourself in your initial practice. I thought it'd be worthwhile to define what I'm calling your initial practice. I think there's different facets to it. There's clinical practice, which is probably what most of you are thinking about when you say your initial practice. This is what a lot of your training is focused on, establishing those clinical skills, and so that's definitely a big part of it. But I think there's other parts that you also should consider, and consider early on, one of which being your research program. If you have some interest in research, then that should be a part of your practice. Your teaching philosophy. Most people in pharmacy who completed residency end up in a role where they're teaching someone something. And so you need to have a teaching philosophy, an approach to teaching either students or residents. And then I think the last part, which people don't necessarily actively think about, is what's your professional persona, and how do you plan to develop that? So let's talk about each of these individually. So clinical practice. This is probably the easiest to think about because you've got a lot of role models that you've seen, preceptors in your residency program. But a key point, I think, in establishing yourself in the clinical practice area is to form relationships. And you can be the smartest person in the world and have great training at some of the top residency programs, but if you don't have relationships with the people that you're going to try and convince to do what you want when you're taking care of patients, you're not going to be very effective. So when you get into your first real job after residency, figure out who are the key leaders I need to know. Who's the nursing leaders, who's the medicine leaders, and who's the administrators, whether it be hospital administration or pharmacy administration. And you want to get to know those people. And then you also want them to think of you as the drug therapy experts. So you deliver a product as the pharmacist, and you want to deliver that high level of service at all times, so that you have you build that reputation amongst your peers. But the key thing here, I think, is to form relationships early. And I think if we went around and asked the seasoned clinicians in the room, they would agree that relationships really make the difference in getting things done right for your patients. Let's move on now to the research program. Now, a research program, if you're a faculty member, may be something different than a clinical pharmacist in a hospital, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily approach it in too much of a different way. Oftentimes people, I think, enter into a first position and say, I just want to get my clinical practice set up, and then I'll focus on some of this other stuff. But it's really never too early to start thinking about research if that's an area you want to have as part of your career. The reality is you can do 2 years of residency and you know a little bit about doing a research project. You're not necessarily going to have all the skills you need to jump in and do your own project. And so a key tip, I think, is to find an experienced mentor, somebody who's done something in research. And the good thing about research is you can tell what somebody's done because you can look them up, you can Google them, headline, see what they've done, see what kind of a reputation they've built for themselves. And that's the people with a good track record are the ones you might want to try and develop a mentorship relationship with that can guide you in kind of getting things started. I think getting involved with resident projects as a new practitioner is a really great way to get some practice in developing skills. At our hospital, we purposefully take new practitioners and pair them up with somebody who's been around for a while. And we make that new person be the project preceptor so that they have to kind of run the project with the resident. And from the resident standpoint, they don't necessarily know that the more experienced person's kind of pulling the strings in the background and help making sure things go as they should. And so that gives that new preceptor the experience of mentoring a less experienced person in project management, but also it helps to expand our pool of people that can be involved in projects. And so using those resident projects as an opportunity to kind of build those skills and further develop your skills. And you know, after two or three projects, people are ready to kind of run those projects on their own. They're much more able to come up with ideas and develop their own research projects. And then in terms of getting things done, it's always much easier to do things with a group than with one single person. You can complete a project on your own. It may take you a couple of years and lots of hours, maybe after you've gotten all your other duties done. But if you have a group or a collaborative group that you can work with, that's going to be much more fruitful. You know, if you can get a couple people with similar interests together, form relationships with those people, and then that collaboration is going to make it much easier for you to be more productive and produce more of an output that you're looking for. So once again, relationships. You tell the guy whose office is right next door to mine, always says relationships are really all that matters. So I think that's kind of a key thing here. Next, your teaching philosophy. Okay, this one's for the seasoned people in the room. Has anybody's precepting style changed since they first started? By show of hands. Has anybody's not changed? I mean, I think when you start off as a new preceptor, you just do what you saw people do, and you try it out, and maybe you're not as good as the preceptors that tried that out on you, and maybe certain things will work and certain things won't work. And so I guarantee your precepting style from the first time you have a student or resident conversation with you will be different than 2, 3, 5 years later. And you're hopefully going to make some changes based on experimentation. I think you can try different things. A lot of the same old things that people do in precepting or teaching don't always continue to work. And so I think you need to kind of approach it as you can experiment, try different things. And then also at this point in time, there's a lot of opportunities to improve your teaching or precepting skills. There's, because of the residency accreditation standard that requires preceptor development as a part of the plan for the program, there's a lot more opportunities for preceptor development programs that are out there. There's the National Preceptor Conference in Washington every year. There's RLS workshops at the Midger meeting. All of those are relevant to teaching anybody, students or residents. But also a lot of colleges of pharmacy are also offering preceptor development opportunities to meet ACCP requirements as well. So take advantage of those opportunities, especially early, but you know, it doesn't hurt later on as well. But the whole point of preceptor development is that we can always learn something, and it may be only tangentially related to precepting students or residents, but it still could be of value. The last facet, I think, of your early practice is your professional persona. How many are in one of the highly cliquey areas of pharmacy? How many ID people? Anybody? We got one. So I think you probably know that ID is this really small world, and it's all who you know. And cardiology is kind of like that. Critical care, I don't know that I had that same bias about critical care. But there are little niches within pharmacy where I guess networking is a little more built in or expected. And then there's other areas where I think you have to be a little more deliberate about it. If you look at your professional persona, early networking in your practice area, I think, is a very important thing to do. And a way to do that is to potentially volunteer in organizations, and even doing small things You know, at this stage of the game, you're not going to be the president of whatever society. You're not necessarily even going to be asked to be on a committee for a big national organization, but you can do some little things that kind of get you involved and get you meeting people and kind of build that network. Certain sub areas of pharmacy do have some good networking opportunities. I think especially for younger practitioners. I think SCCM has a big pharmacy group that you know, a lot of our newer critical care people have been able to get involved in really soon after residency. ACCP, some of the PRNs are good opportunities, and not only get on listservs and things like that, but maybe when you go to the meetings, make sure you go to the networking receptions and just meet people. Those are really a good way to kind of get your name out there. Who are you and what you're doing at your practice site. Publishing in your area of practice is a fairly obvious way to build your professional persona. And that doesn't necessarily have to be large clinical research studies. This could be reviews. The point here is to attach your name to some area of pharmacy practice and establish yourself as someone who knows what they're talking about in that area. And I remember a couple of years ago, there was a guy that came, I forget where, from Colorado maybe, to give a talk at the ASHP meeting. And I knew of him. He was one of these people that I knew of, but I didn't actually know him. And I went up to him afterwards. He was a cardiology person. I did my training in cardiology. So I went up to him afterwards and introduced myself, and he knew who I was. Well, we had never met before, but he knew who I was because I published papers, and he had read my papers. And in fact, I think he might have said something about reading my papers. So, you know, that's a way, even at that point, I was only a couple of years out of fellowship, and it's a way for somebody to know who you are without actually ever having met you. And then finally, look for opportunities to speak at meetings. And that could be at a state level, like this meeting. But there's ways to give presentations at a national level as well. I think ASHP has a pretty open door type approach to meeting programming and finding speakers. You submit an idea, and if the idea is good, then you get to present it at the mid-year meeting. I think some organizations like ACCP, maybe a little more who you know gets you in the door to give a presentation at those meetings. So look at things like ASHP, the mid-year meeting, or the preceptor conference. Both have opportunities where you can propose things, and if your proposal is good, then you will get invited. Okay, so those are kind of the facets and how I would recommend you target each one of those facets. And I think one overarching part of getting it or establishing yourself in a new practice is really one that hopefully everybody's already on track for. And that's finding yourself a mentor. I know in interviewing P2I1 candidates, I can tell who's got a mentor and who has never talked to anybody about the future at all. And it's just based on the quality of what they submit and the quality of their answers and really their perspective on the profession. I think mentors at this next level, at your level, can do a lot for you to provide advice about how to achieve goals. You know, some of the things you're going to try to do early in your career are things that they've already done and they know how to get there, or they've advised countless other people on how to get there. So it helps to have that leg up and to have some experience to draw from that you're too new to have on your own. A mentor is also going to be knowledgeable about a lot of the early career issues. They can advise you on things like board certification and how to approach pharmacy organizations. If they're within your institution, how to get things done within your department. You know, who do I have to talk to and how do I navigate certain things. And then a big advantage, I think, of mentors is often mentors are more senior and they've been around and they know people, and opportunities may come across their desk and they can recommend very sharp mentee that they have for some opportunities, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a moment. Okay, this last point, don't take yourself too seriously. You may have done 2 great residencies or done some other type of training and very high quality training, but at the end of the day, you've still just gotten out of residency. And I think there's a lot of people in pharmacy that take themselves too seriously. Look at all the great things I've done. Well, there's always somebody who's done more. There's always somebody who's got a bigger CV or a better reputation or more high quality research. But everybody should just try and do their best, but not necessarily get a big head about it. It really doesn't help anybody, and I think the people that are more humble and kind of approach things as, I'm just doing my job and making the best out of things. They're a lot more easy to get along with and go a little further than somebody who takes themselves a little too seriously. So now let's transition to networking. How many here feel like they have a small network, professional network? How many think they have a medium professional network, medium size? How many think they have a large professional network? Okay. So everybody seems to have some kind of network, and so I think that the initial network we all have is our training programs. You went to school somewhere, you got to know certain faculty, those faculty know people, and that's kind of a network. You go do a residency, and that residency program, you've got multiple different preceptors that you can interact with, and they all know people because they all did residencies, and they all went to pharmacy schools. So even if you say you have a small network, I bet you might have a little bigger network than you think. There are people that have huge networks, though, that's for sure. So that initial network, you really have to rely on the training programs. But as you get into practice, your network consists of people from your practice site. If you come into a large academic hospital, you probably have some people from all over the place, and those people trained all over the place, and they know people from all over the place. When you have a specific area of practice, ID, cardiology, critical care, ambulatory care, those are all areas where you get to know people within that practice area, and so that becomes your network. And then also organizational involvement, both at the state, local, and then the national level. That's going to further broaden your network as well. So why do you need to have a network? Well, one reason might be to get a job. And so I was trying to think about how to make this semi-scientific. So here's me. I went to the University of Toledo College of Pharmacy. When I was looking for residencies, I actually only applied to 3 places, but it was okay to do back then. I wouldn't be scrambling with only 3 places. I applied at MUSC in Charleston, UIC in Chicago, and Harper. Did you know that?
No, I did not know. Before my day.
So I applied to those 3 places, and I thought about the networks I had at the time. So there was a faculty member a cardiology faculty member at Toledo that I worked a lot with, and he knew the cardiology person at MUSC, who happened to be one of the program directors. And then I also did multiple rotations at the Cleveland Clinic as a pharmacy student. And this same program director from MUSC was consulted by the Cleveland Clinic to come help them establish one of their residency programs. And the guy that set that consultation up actually wrote my letter of recommendation, so they kind of knew each other. And so that was my connection to MUSC. And then there were about 3 or 4 faculty members at University of Toledo who had trained at UIC. And so there was a pretty strong connection there. Of course, a couple of those people wrote my letter of recommendation. So that personal connection between people that were recommending me to the people that were evaluating my credentials probably helped me to get into MUSC. How many think that they have a network that helped them get into the residency they're at? Everybody on this side. Nobody on this side. It's just like the west side of the state, east side of the state. Okay, here's another example. And this is a little more like what you might be thinking of in the next phase of your career. I think that a lot of the professional opportunities that have come my way have really been because of my network and kind of who I know. So I did my residency at MUSC, and Jean Nappy was somebody I worked with a lot there. Her area of specialization is in cardiology, and she's a very well-connected individual. She knows a lot of people, probably everybody in cardiology. I did my fellowship at Hartford Hospital. He was with Mike White. He's a little younger, and so maybe doesn't have quite as extensive of a network as Jean Nappy, but he's published 1 million papers, and everybody in cardiology at least knows Mike White because of all the papers he publishes. Jean Nappy's really good friends with Sarah Spindler. Mike White knows Sarah Spindler. This lady here named Cindy Sinoski used to work with Sarah Spindler. And so I kind of got to know all these people at some point or another because of who I knew. I knew Jean Nappy, I knew Mike White. I ran into Sarah Spindler when I was with Mike White, and then, that's how you get to know people like that. My connection with Cindy has led to publication opportunities and speaking opportunities with ASHP Advantage. My connection with Mike, obviously publication opportunities and speaking opportunities. So these are things that people have to invite you to do. And people invite you to do something because somebody else said, yeah, he's not going to screw it up. So it would be a good option to ask to do this. So it doesn't just stop with getting a job. There's a lot of other things that can come down the line that having that networking and knowing people and having people know what you can do will help you out in the long run. Okay, so that's networking. I think we're doing okay on time. Organizational involvement is the next major area here. So there are several reasons why organizational involvement is important in my opinion. Probably the bullet point that I have as last is what oftentimes people will think of most. But I'm going to flip it around. I think the reason organizational involvement is important is because it makes you better. It makes you a better pharmacist, and you're able to contribute better at your own site because of your organizational involvement. I think that because it gives you perspective. I think a lot of times people maybe get into their silo of this is how we do everything at my place, and it's got to be the best way to do it. But when you interact with people from other places that have the same problems but do it differently, then you're like, oh, well, maybe my way isn't the only way, and there's other ways to go about this. And then it also gives you that bigger network. I mean, the whole point of organizations is to have a network of people that have a similar goal and have similar practice interests. A second benefit, I think, is that organizational involvement benefits your institution because you're bringing in outside ideas that it's really hard to bring outside ideas into an institution. I mean, the only way to do that is to really hire somebody. And how often can we hire people anymore? So that's a definite benefit. And then finally, you may be able to make the profession better. But I put that last because maybe you're on some professional organization and you're really not making the profession that much better. You're just contributing to that organization. You're still getting those first two things, which is making things better for you, which is making things better for your institution, and ultimately, you think, making things better for your patients that you take care of. So I think that you can make the profession better, but that's just a part of it. You have to look at kind of the whole big picture. I think this is one of those areas, probably like research, where we think about it as, well, I'm going to do that, but maybe I'm not going to do it just yet. I want to get all this other stuff taken care of. And I think you can do this earlier on. It's just that you have to kind of reset what your expectation for involvement is. You don't have to get involved as a traditional leadership role. You don't have to be the president or secretary of some organization. You don't have to be on some big committee to get involved. There's lots of volunteer type opportunities in different organizations. I think there's also different routes you can go. In some cases, it may make sense for you to demonstrate gradually more involved roles and leadership at a state level, and then go on to seek more involved roles at a national level. And then the opposite approach to that could be get involved in some small things at a national level and get people to know who you are, and then eventually that progresses to bigger things. And I'll talk about what some of those small things might be. But just like how you're going to jump into your practice site, I think a plan for how you're going to get involved in professional organizations will probably help you to be more effective in getting to where you think you want to get to. Some non-committee, non-leadership type early career opportunities for people coming straight out of residency could be give presentations, as I mentioned before, and getting involved in an organization that way. One really easy thing you can do is be an ASHP poster mentor. Has anybody ever done that? It's kind of a poorly publicized opportunity. I think you have to be on the ASHP website at the right time, but how many of the residents had presented their posters at the midyear? And then there was somebody that came around and asked you questions, like one person. Everybody else just averted their eyes. But that one person was an ASHP poster mentor, and they were there by design to ask you questions. You can volunteer to be one of those people. It's like a 2-hour commitment, and it's something you can put on your CV, and it's good for the residents because there's somebody that asks them questions from the poster. So look on the ASHP website. I think it's under like the Get Involved tab or something. Peer review is another easy thing, I think, for someone with a clinical pharmacist position to get involved with. Again, it's a thing that sometimes you need a mentor to get you involved with. You need to have somebody recommend you as a peer reviewer. Other journals you can just apply, like AJHP, you can apply. But getting involved with peer review is, it's a service to the profession. I think it sharpens your own skills as critically evaluating a paper. And if you do a good enough job and you do enough of them, then maybe somebody will ask you to be on an editorial board someday. Writing BPS questions. Has anybody who's been around for a while ever written BPS questions? One, couple. The questions that are on the board certification exam are questions written by real pharmacists, and it's something where you can just send in 4 questions, and I did it a couple times when I was early on, and then if you submit questions, you actually got invited to go to a question development session, and to be honest, I learned more about writing questions from that whole process than being faculty at Wayne State. Nobody teaches you how to write questions. They teach you how to write questions. And so that was a big advantage to me. And then a couple years later, somebody just called me out of the blue and said, you want to come to San Antonio? We're going to do a question bank maintenance session. And we sat there in a hotel room for 2 days and reviewed BPS questions and made sure they were still up to date and relevant. It was painful, but I got 2 really good dinners out of it in San Antonio. So, it's an opportunity and it's a contribution back to the profession. ACCP CV Review Service, that's something that's easy to sign up for. You just sign up and then they send you a CV and you give some comments to some pharmacy student or resident. You could act as a judge for abstracts for meetings, volunteer to do that. And then if you get to the point where you're involved with the residency training program, you could be asked to be a residency surveyor, a volunteer surveyor, and that's a good opportunity to get involved as well. Okay, so some tips for how to get involved, especially at this early stage. I would say start as soon as possible, because I think it keeps you relevant and engaged early on. I think if I think about people that really have no professional involvement other than they just go to work, those people often lack perspective about how the profession works and how things happen outside of their own place. And so I think you need to get involved early if you can. I would say get involved with something you're really interested in. Don't just volunteer just to be involved. So if you're really passionate about residency training, then look for opportunities at the state and national level to really get involved with making a difference in residency training. If you're interested in clinical policies and things like that, try and find opportunities on the state and national level to do that. I would encourage you, especially early on, to not think any opportunity is too small for you. I advise people that if you've got some time, it's not going to take a lot of time, and someone's asking you to do it, just do it. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. It can only help you. And it may seem like a little thing, but these little things do add up, and you do develop somewhat of a relationship with organizations. I think if you're doing some of these littler things, these littler volunteer things for them. And then keep in mind that it's often who you know. The ASHP and ACCP selection process for like the higher level committees and appointments and things is really all about who you know. The president, I mean, there's an application process, and you'll say, I'm interested in these 5 committees, but the president at the time is the one who says, okay, I know this guy, he's going to go and do that one. And it's really a who you know kind of thing. So with that in mind, if you're making a plan for what you want to be involved in, then you got to get to know the right people that are going to help you to get involved with some of those things. So, what is your plan to get there? That's just what I mentioned. You got to take into account some of these small things can add up to bigger things, and who I know helps me to get to where I want to get to. And then my last tip or word of advice is that beware the price of confidence. Oftentimes, if you do well in getting involved in a professional organization, then they'll ask you to do more and more and more. So we want to keep that balance and not get overwhelmed with some of the extracurricular type things. Okay, so the last part was reinventing. I think this is probably the most challenging of the objectives that I was given. So what is reinventing? I think that reinventing could be interpreted a lot of different ways. I don't think anybody today wants to come in and be in the exact same position at the start than at the end of their career, whenever that might be. I think everybody progresses in some way, and I think we're kind of hardwired to be like that. And there's lots of ways to reinvent. You can move away, you can just leave the institution you're at, you can move up in the institution, you can move in a different direction, you can move in a direction that drives you, in an area that drives you. You can move to a place where you feel like you add more value, or you can move with the flow of healthcare or pharmacy in general. So the only way I could come up with talking about reinventing is to think about my own career path. And when I think about the last little over 10 years of what I've done in pharmacy, I think of it in kind of different segments. I don't think about it that much, but when I do, I think about it in different segments. And so I kind of try to depict that here for you. And you can you'll see some of those things moving away, moving up, moving in a different direction. I think I've done all of those things at some point so far. So when I started out in 2003, I was a co-funded faculty member with Wayne State and Henry Ford, and I was in a tenure track. I had a focus on research and developing a research program, a lot of clinical teaching as well, and that was primarily my focus. And then in 2006, as I kind of got more accustomed to what was going on at the hospital, a little more in tune with some of the issues at the hospital, I initiated a PGY1 residency program and an inpatient anticoagulation service. And I've really been riding those two things for way too many years. I'm ready to get rid of the anticoagulation service. I still like the residency stuff. 2006, so that kind of was two new areas of focus, and it required me to learn new things and practice new skills that I didn't necessarily have to practice in my first couple years as faculty. In 2007, I realized that I really liked doing the residency stuff, and I liked the running this inpatient anticoagulation service and establishing clinical services. So I left Wayne State to take a clinical manager position at Henry Ford, because really what I was doing, or what I enjoyed doing most, were not the things at the hospital or at the college side. It was more the hospital side, and that's why I decided to move over. And once again, that was an entirely new set of skills that I had to develop and learn. A lot of how to get people to do things and manage these people and things like that. And so that was a whole new set of skills to develop. Then in 2011, I had been a program director for a couple of years, and I began getting involved as a co-surveyor for residency programs with ASHP, which was a new challenge. But it also put me in hospitals all over the country a couple times a year, which gave me new perspectives on things. In 2012, we decided to start planning for EPIC implementation. So then I had to learn all about CPOE systems and how to implement those, but also how to get a health system with multiple different pharmacy departments and hospitals, and how to get us all going in the same direction. So again, a lot of new skills were developed and learned at that point. And in addition, at that time, we had pretty much blown up our practice model and redesigned our practice model. And that involved me taking a step away from my clinical manager position and really looking at the whole department as, and I had to learn a lot about drug distribution and automated dispensing cabinets and kind of the whole big picture of pharmacy and drug delivery within the hospital. In 2013, just last year, I was appointed to the ASHP Commission on Credentialing, and it's really not just going to a meeting or two a year. I mean, there's again skills and you have to think about things a little differently. So I kind of looked at that as a bit of a change in mindset as well. And now, 2014, at our own institution, we have a big focus on really creating a system pharmacy product and having system leadership. So that's going to be, I think, another opportunity to build new skills and change focus. And then, obviously, all of us in health system practice are dealing with the economic challenges that are coming or are already here. I think that's going to change the way we think about things, and I think that's going to cause us to develop, again, new skills, or cause me to develop new skills, and I'm guessing the rest of us as well. So I kind of look at these as multiple different phases where I've kind of changed direction, even though I've been in the same place, kind of in the same place most of the time. And I think some key tips for reinventing is that you have to learn new things and maybe be exposed to things that you wouldn't have considered as something you'd be interested in doing previously. when I was a pharmacy resident, the director of pharmacy, when I was on the admin rotation, said, you should consider being a pharmacy manager. I said, you're crazy. But then I got exposed to things as a faculty member that were more on the administrative side of things, and I did like some of those aspects. And so, you know, if you sit in one specific spot and you kind of focus and don't expose yourself to other things, then you're probably not going to diverge too much from that path. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in pharmacy, and can it's not a bad thing to try and branch out of it. I think if you have to own or create something from scratch, that's a great way to reinvent yourself, because it kind of becomes your, this is my new focus. So creating a new service or a new pharmacy process, become an expert in that area and really make that be you know, what you're doing for a little while. And then the last point, and I think this is probably one of the most important, is explore a new path. When I go out on surveys for residencies, you always go with somebody who's been around a long time. An old guy, usually. And these guys have done a lot of stuff. They've been everywhere. They've been directors at 5 different hospitals. They've been chairs of pharmacy practice departments in colleges of pharmacy. They've been everywhere. They've been consulting. I always ask them, how did you get to where you're at? What path did you take? And I think you can get a lot of valuable information about where you could go if you see all the different ways people have kind of come up through the pharmacy ranks and how they've established themselves in the profession. So don't underestimate the you know, the value you can get from just asking somebody who's been around longer than you, how'd you get here? So, in conclusion, I think these are my key points. Make a plan for where you think you want to go, but be open to that plan changing, because it probably will. Learn new things, because that's going to help you go to the next step. Learn about paths that others have taken, and I would say start early with the planning of your initial career path, where you want to go, and professional involvement.